Welcome to Night Watch Observer. It's lovely to have you here wherever you are tonight. Maybe you're under a heavy blanket with the lamp still on, the kind of low, warm light that makes a room feel smaller and safer than it is. Maybe you're on a couch with the television off and the house finally quiet. Maybe you're somewhere moving through the dark, a train, a long drive, a city sliding past a window. Wherever you are and whatever time it is in your corner of the world, you've found a quiet place to land for a little while. So settle in. Let your shoulders drop. There's nothing here you have to keep up with, nothing you have to remember, nothing you have to do but breathe a little slower than you were a minute ago. Tonight I want to take you somewhere very far away, but I want to do it very, very gently. We're going to spend the next while inside a single ordinary day at a place most people have never heard of, a place whose whole job is to listen patiently across distances so large they stop meaning anything for the faint voices of machines we sent out into the dark and never brought home. And I'll tell you right now, the way I always do, that I'll try not to make any of this so interesting it keeps you awake. But if it does, well, at least you'll have learned something soft and strange before morning. A fair trade, I think. So here's the first small thing I want to leave with you before we even begin properly. Out at the very edge of where our machines have traveled, there is a spacecraft so far from home that only one antenna on the entire surface of the Earth can speak to it. Not one country, not one network of dishes, one single dish in one valley in Australia. If that one antenna goes quiet, then for that lonely traveler, the whole planet has gone silent. The whole planet. Every voice we have. Hold on to that for a moment because we'll come back to it slowly. The way you'd return to a thought you weren't quite finished with. There's a story in that single thread, and it's a kinder one than you might expect. Before we drift any deeper, let me say one quiet thing, and then I'll let it go. If you find these slow journeys soothing, a gentle like and a subscribe really do help this little Night Watch corner keep going. Small creators like me genuinely rely on it, more than you'd think, and it costs you nothing but a moment. And to those of you already here, already part of the quiet, thank you. Truly, you're the reason there's a light on at all. So tell me, before you drift off, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? I always like to imagine all of you out there in the dark, in different cities, different hours, a scattering of small awake lights across a turning planet. It's a comforting picture. Now settle back in. And let me say, the other thing I always say, the most important thing, you do not have to follow all of this. You really don't. If your eyes start to close, let them. If your mind wanders off somewhere warm and stops keeping track, that is exactly what's supposed to happen. None of these facts are going anywhere. The dishes will still be turning whether you're awake for it or not. The spacecraft will still be out there. The whole point of tonight is to give your busy mind something soft and true to rest against, like a hand on a shoulder, and then to let you slip away from it whenever you're ready. There's no test at the end, there's only sleep. We'll move slowly, one quiet fact at a time, and if you fall asleep before we're done, then you've used the night exactly right. So, let's begin, shall we? Gently. I want to start with the thing that when I first understood it made me sit very still for a long moment. It's about how faint these signals really are, the voices we're listening for. You see, when a spacecraft out at the far reaches of the solar system speaks to us, the radio whisper it sends back is almost unimaginably small by the time it crosses all that emptiness and finally brushes against a dish here on Earth. We're talking about signals on the order of a billionth of a watt. I'll say that again, slowly, because numbers like that just slide off the mind otherwise. A billionth of a single watt. A watt is already a small thing, the kind of power you'd measure in a tiny indicator light, and we are catching a billionth of one. Here is the way I love to think about it, the way that finally made it real for me. If you took all the energy ever collected by these great dishes across decades from every distant spacecraft combined, all of it gathered up from all those years of patient listening, the total amount of energy in that whole enormous pile is often described as being less than the energy of a single snowflake landing on the ground. Picture that. A snowflake drifting down on a still night, touching the Earth without a sound. That tiny, soft impact holds more energy than everything our great antennas have ever gathered from the deep across all those years of listening, and from that almost nothing from less than a snowflake's worth of whisper, we have built maps of other worlds. We have seen storms on Jupiter and rings around Saturn and the cold blue face of Neptune from less than a snowflake. Now you might wonder how the signal got so faint in the first place, and it isn't because these spacecraft are shy or broken or weak, it's just distance, doing what distance always does. A typical deep space probe, way out there past the planets, radiates its message home with a transmitter of only about 20 watts. 20 watts. That's roughly the power of the little bulb inside your refrigerator. Think of that. Open the fridge door late at night, and there's that small, soft glow that lights up the milk and the leftovers. That much power. That's all a spacecraft has to shout home with across billions of kilometers of nothing. A refrigerator light calling out into the dark. And of course, light spreads. 20 watts here in your kitchen easily fills the whole room. But 20 watts spread out across the unthinkable gulf between here and the outer solar system gets thinner and thinner and thinner, like a single drop of ink released into an ocean, until what finally arrives at Earth is that billionth of a watt. That snowflake's whisper. And yet we still hear it. That's the part I can't quite get over even now. We hear the refrigerator light calling from the edge of everything. So how do you catch something that quiet? That's really what the whole rest of tonight is about in one way or another. And it starts, beautifully simply, with where you choose to stand on the Earth. Because here's the problem you'd run into right away if it were your job to listen to a single spacecraft all day and all night without ever losing it. The Earth turns. You know this in your body. The sun comes up, crosses the sky, goes down. The stars wheel overhead from dusk to dawn. Everything out beyond us seems to rise and set, not because it's moving, but because we are, slowly, steadily, spinning beneath it. And a spacecraft, a far-off probe, is no different. From any one spot on the ground, it rises into view, drifts across the sky for some hours, and then slips down below the horizon as the Earth carries you around to face the other way. And once it's below your horizon, the solid bulk of the whole planet is sitting between you and it. You simply cannot hear it. The Earth itself has become a wall. So if you only had one dish in one place, you would lose your spacecraft for a good part of every single day, every time the Earth turned its back on it. Hours of silence every day, no matter how good your dish was. And for some of these missions, those silent hours are not acceptable. There are moments, delicate moments, when you cannot afford to look away. The solution is so simple and so elegant that it almost feels like a held breath. You don't build one dish, you build 3, and you place them around the planet with great care, spaced roughly a third of the way around the Earth from each other. 120 degrees apart in longitude, 3 great listening stations, evenly spread around the turning globe, like 3 friends standing in a wide circle, each facing outward. This is the Deep Space Network. That's its name, and it's a good plain name for what it is. The Deep Space Network, NASA's 3 great ears listening to the far solar system. And once you know about the three of them spaced the way they are, the whole quiet genius of the thing falls into place. The first complex sits in California, in the high Mojave Desert, in a wide empty stretch of land. It's called the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex, Goldstone for short. It rests inside an enormous military reservation called Fort Irwin, and that turns out to be a gift because the wide protected emptiness all around keeps it far from cities, far from crowds, far from all the busy radio chatter of ordinary life. A great quiet desert, kept quiet on purpose. The second complex is on the other side of the world, in Spain, near a small town called Robledo de Chavela, out in the hills west of Madrid. It's called the Madrid Deep Space Communications Complex. And the third sits all the way down in the southern hemisphere in Australia near the capital, Canberra, in a green valley called Tidbinbilla, the Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex. Say those three names slowly to yourself if you like: Goldstone, Madrid, Canberra, California, Spain, Australia. 3 points spread wide around a spinning planet. A desert, a range of Spanish hills, an Australian valley. 3 quiet places, each with its great dishes tilted up toward the same far sky. And now here's the lovely part. The part that once you see it, you'll feel in the simple turning of the Earth itself. Because they're spaced about a third of the way around the world from each other, something graceful happens as the planet turns. Imagine a spacecraft far out in space, and imagine that right now it's high in the sky over Goldstone in the California desert. Goldstone's great dish is locked onto it, gathering that snowflake whisper. But the Earth is turning, always turning, slow and steady. And as the hours pass, that spacecraft begins to sink toward Goldstone's western horizon. It's setting. In a little while it will drop out of view, and the bulk of the planet will rise up to block it. But by the time that's about to happen at Goldstone, something else has already happened on the far side of the world. The very same turning of the Earth that is carrying the spacecraft down out of California's sky has been lifting it up into the sky over the next complex along, over Australia perhaps, or over Spain, depending on which way you go. So just as one great ear is losing sight of the spacecraft, the next great ear is rising to meet it, opening its view, catching the same faint thread. It is a handoff, not a goodbye. That's the thing I want you to feel as you drift tonight. Because of those 3 stations, spaced just so, a spacecraft never falls into silence as the Earth turns. It is simply passed gently from one listener to the next, and then to the next, and around again, hour after hour, day after day. The Earth's own rotation, the very thing that ought to keep dropping the connection, is turned into the thing that keeps it alive. 3 dishes taking turns so that the spinning of the world never once lets the thread fall, never drops the probe. There is always at least one giant dish somewhere on Earth with the far traveler in view. I find something deeply restful in that, honestly. The idea that the very turning that takes the sun away from you each evening, the turning that brings on your night, is the same turning that hands a distant spacecraft safely from one waiting ear to the next. Your darkness is someone else's daylight. While you sleep on the far side of the world, another dish is lifting into the morning to take up the listening you can no longer do. The watch is never empty. It just moves around the planet with the light and with the dark, the way the night itself moves, the way it's moving over you right now. Now you might wonder why these 3 complexes are tucked away in such out-of-the-way places. A desert in California, hills in Spain, a valley in Australia. There's a tender reason for it, and it goes right back to how faint those signals are. A snowflake's whisper, remember. The trouble is that the modern world is loud. Not loud to our ears necessarily, but loud in radio, in all the invisible signals humming out of our cities, our phones, our towers, all our chatter filling the air. And to a dish straining to catch a billionth of a watt from the edge of the solar system, all that human noise is like trying to hear a single far-off whisper while standing in the middle of a crowded, shouting room. So the complexes are built very deliberately in remote, bowl-shaped valleys. And that bowl shape matters. The hills and ridges that ring each site rise up all around like the cupped sides of two hands. And they act as a natural shield, a soft wall against the radio noise of the distant world beyond. Inside the bowl, it's radio quiet, a pocket of stillness scooped out of the noisy planet where the great dishes can sit and listen without the clamor of everything else drowning out the whisper they're waiting for. Imagine that. We went looking for quiet valleys, not for the silence you can hear, but for a deeper silence underneath it, a stillness in the very air itself, just so we could listen better to the dark. There's something almost monastic about it. 3 quiet sanctuaries sheltered in their valleys, kept hushed on purpose, so they can attend to something very far away. And though the 3 complexes are scattered across the world, oceans and continents apart, they don't each go their own way. They're all guided, all conducted from a single room, a single nerve center far from any of the dishes in Pasadena, California, at a place called the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. People just call it JPL. And inside JPL there is a room called the Space Flight Operations Facility, a long name, so they shorten it fondly to the SFOF. This is the heart of it all. From this one room, the whole planet-spanning network is watched over and coordinated, the schedules set, the spacecraft tended. And here's a small detail I love. That room, the SFF, has been in continuous operation for so long and has been the quiet command center for so many journeys out into the solar system that it has been declared a National Historic Landmark. Think about that for a moment. We protect old battlefields and grand old houses and the places where important things happened. And we've decided that this room too, this room full of screens where people sit in the soft glow and keep faith with our most distant machines, is a place worth preserving for all the generations to come. A landmark. A room where the listening happens, marked down as something history should never be allowed to forget. I find that quietly moving. Of all the rooms in the world, we chose to honor the one that keeps watch over the dark. And maybe the most comforting thing of all, the thing I'd most like you to carry down into sleep tonight, is how long this gentle vigil has been going on, because the Deep Space Network is old, older than you might guess. It traces its beginnings back to 1958, right around the very birth of NASA itself, in the earliest days when we'd only just begun to reach past the edge of our own air, which means this network of listeners is one of the oldest, continuously operating pieces of the whole space program, older than nearly every spacecraft it now speaks to, older than the great probes it tends. It was already here, already listening, before most of its distant companions were even dreamed of, let alone built and launched and sent away. And in all that time since 1958, the listening has, in a real sense, never stopped. 60 and more years of it. Through all the decades, through everything that has happened down here on the noisy surface of the world, those great dishes in their quiet valleys have gone on turning, gone on catching whispers, gone on passing the thread from one hand to the next as the earth turned beneath them. The conversation that began back then has essentially never once fallen silent. Somewhere, on some ordinary night just like this one, a dish has always been lifted toward the dark, holding the faint voice of something very far from home. So as you lie there, wherever you are, I want you to let that settle over you like another blanket. Right now, even now, in this very moment, while you're growing heavy and warm and slow, somewhere on the turning earth, a great dish is quietly listening. Maybe in the Mojave dawn, maybe under the Spanish stars, maybe in the deep night of an Australian valley. One of them, at least, is awake and attentive, catching the snowflake whisper of a machine billions of kilometers away, holding the line so it doesn't break. Someone is keeping the watch. Someone is always keeping the watch. It has been kept, unbroken, since long before this night, and it will go on being kept long after you've fallen asleep. And we've only just begun, you and I, because we haven't yet looked at the dishes themselves, those great gentle giants in their valleys, and there is so much about them that is soft and surprising and strange. There's one of them that weighs as much as a small ship, and yet it turns without any effort at all, almost frictionlessly, because of something only a fraction of a millimeter thick. We'll get to that slowly. There's a dish so wide you could fit a whole baseball field down inside its curve. We'll get to that too, but not yet. For now, just rest in the simple shape of it. 3 great ears spaced a third of the way around the turning world. A whisper quieter than a snowflake, a handoff, never a goodbye. A watch that has never once gone dark since 1958. Breathe in slowly, and breathe out slower still. There's no hurry here at all. The dishes are turning. The thread is held. And somewhere in the dark, far from here, a small refrigerator light is still calling softly home, and someone, somewhere on this quiet planet, is still listening for it. Welcome to Night Watch Observer. It's lovely to have you here, wherever you are tonight. Maybe you're tucked under a heavy blanket with the lamp still on. Maybe you're on a train or a couch, or just lying flat in the dark, waiting for the day to finally let go of you. However you've arrived, you're welcome. Settle in. There's nothing you need to do here but breathe. And if you enjoy these slow journeys into the quiet corners of the world, a gentle like and subscribe really helps this little channel keep going. Small creators like me rely on it more than you'd think. And to those of you already here, already part of this quiet ritual, thank you, truly. Before we drift in, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it in your corner of the dark? Now? I'll try not to make this so interesting it keeps you awake, but if it does, well, at least you'll have learned something. A fair trade, I think. There's no test at the end of this. You don't have to hold on to every fact or follow every thread all the way through. If you drift off somewhere in the middle, that's perfectly fine. The dishes will still be turning. The whisper will still be coming home. The ideas will all still be here in the morning, exactly where we left them. We'll move slowly tonight, softly, one quiet marvel at a time. No rush at all, and so let me tell you about that whisper, the one that machine out at the edge of everything is sending home, because it's almost nothing. It's the gentlest thing you can imagine. Out there, billions of kilometers away, a spacecraft is transmitting with all the power it has, and all the power it has is about 20 watts. 20 watts. That's the little bulb that glows inside your refrigerator when you open the door. That faint, warm, yellow light that comes on in the kitchen at midnight when you're looking for something to drink. That's the strength of the voice trying to reach across the whole solar system to find you. And by the time that little refrigerator light of a signal has spread out across all those billions of kilometers, by the time it finally washes over the earth and falls into the curve of a waiting dish, it has thinned to almost nothing. It is staggeringly faint. We're talking about a signal on the order of a billionth of a watt, a number so small it stops meaning anything when you say it out loud. So here's a softer way to hold it. If you gathered up all the energy these great dishes have ever collected, every faint signal from every distant spacecraft, caught and saved across decades of listening, the whole patient harvest of it, you would have less energy than a single snowflake makes when it lands on the ground. One snowflake touching down without a sound. That's the sum of everything we've heard from the deep dark. Isn't that a strange and lovely thing to think about lying here in the warm? Decades of listening to the farthest places, and it all adds up to less than the softest landing snow. And yet somehow we hear it. We catch that snowflake. That's the wonder I want you to drift into tonight. How do you possibly hear something so quiet? You build ears, enormous ones, and you spread them out around the world with a kind of quiet genius. There are 3 of them. 3 great complexes, 3 families of dishes placed carefully around the turning Earth, each one roughly a third of the way around from the others, about 120 degrees apart if you like the number. One sits in the high desert of California, in the Mojave, on a place called Goldstone. Its full name is the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex, and it sits tucked away inside a military reservation called Fort Irwin, which is part of how it stays so wonderfully quiet out there. The second is in Spain, near a small town called Robledo de Chavela, just outside Madrid, the Madrid Deep Space Communications Complex, and the third is in Australia, in a green valley near Canberra called Tidbinbilla. The Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex. 3 names, 3 quiet valleys, 3 sets of giant listening ears, one in the Americas, one in Europe, one down in the southern world. And here is the soft, clever heart of why they're spaced that way, why a third of the way around and not all clustered together. It's because the Earth turns. You know this, you feel it in the way the sun comes up and goes down, in the way the night arrives. The Earth is always rolling slowly eastward beneath us, and as it rolls, the sky overhead is always sliding away. So think about what that means for one of these dishes trying to hold on to a faraway spacecraft. As the Earth turns, that spacecraft drifts lower and lower toward the horizon, the way the moon sinks toward the rooftops near morning. Eventually it sets. It dips below the edge of the world, and that one dish can no longer see it. On its own, a single dish would have to say goodbye every single day and wait the long hours for the spacecraft to rise again. But it doesn't have to, because just as the spacecraft is setting at Goldstone, in the California desert, it is rising up over the horizon somewhere else, maybe over the hills near Madrid, maybe into the night sky above Canberra. The next great ear is already there, already turning to face it, ready to catch the thread before the first one has to let it fall. And so the dishes pass it between them. A handoff, not a goodbye. As one says goodnight, another says hello, and the spacecraft, billions of kilometers away, never even notices. It just keeps whispering home, and there is always someone there to hear it. That's the thing I find so quietly beautiful. Because of those 3 dishes spaced just so around the spinning world, there is no moment in any ordinary day when we lose hold of our most distant machines. The Earth can turn all it likes. The whisper never goes unheard. The line never drops. It's a kind of relay that never ends, 3 sets of arms passing something precious between them in the dark, around and around the world, forever. And the valleys themselves, the places these dishes sit, are chosen with the same gentle care. They're tucked down into bowl-shaped hollows ringed by hills. And those hills aren't an accident. They're a kind of shield. Out in the world, there's a constant clatter of radio noise. Cities hum with it. Phones, towers, broadcasts, all of it spilling invisibly through the air. And against a signal as faint as a snowflake's landing, that clatter would be deafening. It would drown the whisper completely. So the dishes are set down low in the quiet, with the hills rising up all around to block the noise of the world out. They sit in radio silence, in a kind of held breath, just listening. It's why Goldstone hides inside that military land in the desert, far from anyone. It's why these places are remote and still and dark. so that the smallest sound from the farthest place can still be heard. And all three of them, the desert one and the Spanish one and the Australian one, all three answer to a single quiet room. One nerve center, far from all of them, in Pasadena, California. It's part of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the room is called the Space Flight Operations Facility. That's a grand name for what is, in the end, a room full of screens and people keeping watch. But it's a special room. It has been running, in one form or another, continuously for a very long time. It has never really gone quiet. They've made it a National Historic Landmark, the same kind of honor a country gives to a battlefield or an old beloved building because of what has passed through it. From that one room, the whole planet-wide vigil is held together. 3 valleys on 3 continents, all listening, all watched over from a single steady place that has never closed its eyes. And here is the part that I think might be the loveliest of all to carry down into sleep. This unbroken conversation with the dark, it didn't begin recently. It began back in 1958, right at the very beginning, around the time NASA itself was born, before almost any of the spacecraft it now listens to had even been dreamed of. Think about that for a moment. The network is older than nearly everything it talks to. It was already there, already listening, already turning its great ears toward the sky before the travelers it now keeps faith with had ever left the ground. And from that day to this one, the conversation has essentially never stopped. Not for a war, not for a storm, not for any night in all the nights since. Somewhere on the turning earth, in some quiet valley, a dish has always been awake, always been catching some faint thread of a voice from far away and holding on to it, decade after decade, through all the years you've been alive and many before. While you slept as a child, it was listening. While you grew, it was listening. Right now, while you lie here in the warm and slow yourself towards sleep, it is still listening somewhere out there in the dark. A conversation begun long ago. A conversation that has never once gone silent. And it's still going on this very minute, the dishes turning slowly under the stars, the whisper coming home, the watch being kept. It will keep going long after you've drifted off tonight. So you don't have to hold any of it. You can set it down. Let the great ears do the listening. Let the quiet room keep its watch. The thread is held, and it has always been held, and it always will be. So let's go a little deeper now, gently, into those dishes themselves, because that is where things get quietly wonderful. Imagine for a moment that you have driven out into the Mojave Desert, far past the last town, far past the last gas station with its flickering neon, out into the enormous silence of the California high desert, where the Joshua trees stand still in the dark, and the stars come out in a way they never do in the city. You drive through the gate at Fort Irwin, past the military reservation that keeps the curious and the radio-noisy world at a respectful distance, and eventually, out of the desert, something rises. Something so large it doesn't quite make sense the first time you see it. It just seems wrong in the way that a whale seems wrong when you first stand next to one. The scale is simply not what a human brain is ready for. It is a dish, a bowl made of metal, white against the dark sky, pointed upward at a shallow angle, listening. It is 70 meters across, that is 230 feet, a diameter longer than a city block. And if you were to take a baseball diamond, not the whole stadium, just the infield, home plate to first base to second to third, that familiar rough diamond of dirt and chalk, you could set it down inside this dish and it would fit. The curved surface of the reflector alone spans roughly 3,850 square meters. Not a telescope in any sense you might imagine a telescope, not a gleaming glass eye pointed at a distant star. Something more like a vast, shallow valley made of metal, tilted toward the sky, shaped and curved with extraordinary care, so that any radio waves arriving from a precise direction are funneled and focused to a single point, a receiver mounted at the center above the dish on a tall lattice of struts. Every photon that touches all those thousands of square meters gets gathered, nudged, redirected, and delivered to that one small point, every last one. None wasted. This is DSS-14, the dish known inside the Deep Space Network by its number and, a little more warmly, by its nickname, Mars. It has been looking up from the Mojave since the 1960s, and it is still at work tonight, still turning, still listening. DSS-14 is part of the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex, the American site of the three-legged stool the network rests on. And it is, in the quiet vocabulary of the people who work here, simply one of the 70-meter antennas, meaning it belongs to a class, the most capable, most sensitive class the Deep Space Network has. Each of the three complexes around the world has exactly one of them, one at Goldstone, one in the valley near Madrid, one outside Canberra, three dishes of this scale on the whole Earth, and between them they hold the thread. Now, let's sit with the numbers a moment, because numbers, when they are real and specific, have a way of quietly opening into something unexpectedly beautiful if you don't rush past them. 3,850 square meters of reflective surface, 230 feet from one edge to the other. Those dimensions give you a sense of the size, but the size alone doesn't tell you the most remarkable thing about this structure. The most remarkable thing is what it weighs and what it nonetheless manages to do with that weight. A 70-meter antenna, the whole assembly of it, of the bowl, the supporting framework, the axles, the counterweights, the drive systems, weighs somewhere in the region of 2,700 to 3,000 tons. Tons, not pounds, not a misprint. The sort of mass that in other contexts we associate with ocean-going vessels, a small ship, an enormous crane, something that in your imagination ought to sit heavily on the earth and stay there, immovable, because what else could something that heavy do? And yet, this thing moves, not just moves, it points, it tracks, it follows a spacecraft across the sky with a precision measured in thousandths of a degree, smoothly and continuously, compensating for the Earth's rotation, keeping the center of the dish aimed at a target that is itself moving billions of kilometers away across the hours of the night. How do you turn something the mass of a ship with a precision fine enough to thread a needle across the solar system? The answer is water, or rather, oil. And the answer is almost impossibly elegant. The entire rotating structure of a 70-meter antenna sits on what engineers call a hydrostatic bearing. Picture a ring, a great circular rail, and the antenna's base riding on that ring. Now, instead of the base sitting directly on the rail, metal grinding on metal under thousands of tons, the system pumps oil between them. Pressurized oil, filling the tiny gap, creating a layer of lubricating film between the structure and the rail. A layer only fractions of a millimeter thick, thinner than a human hair, thinner in some places than the finest tissue paper. And on that film, all 3,000 tons float. Float is the right word. The oil film doesn't compress under the weight. It distributes the load across the entire bearing surface so that no single point bears more than it can. The result is something close to frictionlessness. The Colossus becomes, in a mechanical sense, almost weightless in the rotational dimension. You could, if the drives were disengaged, push it by hand, gently, with care, but by hand, and it would begin to move. The same thing that lets an ice skater glide, the same thin film physics works here on a scale that makes the math feel like it ought to be impossible. And yet it isn't. It works, it has worked, night after night, across decades. So when DSS-14 slowly swings its great face toward a particular patch of sky, what you are watching, without being able to see it because the oil film is hidden inside the machinery, is 2,700 to 3,000 tons drifting almost frictionlessly on a layer of pressurized oil thinner than your fingernail. Immense mass, carried as though it were nothing, a continent balanced on a soap bubble. That patient turning is controlled not by a human hand at a joystick, but by predictions. Long before a spacecraft rises above the Mojave horizon, the engineers have already calculated where it will be, at what angle, in what part of the sky, at every minute of the upcoming pass. The dish is given a pointing schedule. It begins to move before the spacecraft is even in view, tilting, swinging, aiming at a patch of empty dark sky where the math says the signal will arrive. And then, sooner or later, it does. The first faint ghost of a carrier frequency, so weak it barely registers, rising over the horizon with the spacecraft. And the dish catches it, holds it, and begins the slow turn of the night. But let's spend a moment with the dish itself, because there are details here worth savoring. For all its mass, a 70-meter antenna is a somewhat delicate thing. Not delicate in the sense of fragile. It has stood in the Mojave for decades, through heat and cold and desert wind, but delicate in the sense that its shape matters enormously, and its shape is vulnerable to things you might not expect. One of those things is sunshine. A dish this large, sitting in the Mojave Desert under the California sun, absorbs an uneven distribution of heat during the day. The side facing the sun warms. The side in shadow stays cooler. And metal, when it warms, expands slightly. Metal in shadow cooler stays a little more contracted. The result, if nothing were done about it, would be a slight distortion, a warping of the enormous reflecting surface, a shift in its curve that would alter where incoming radio waves focus and degrade the quality of reception. Thousandths of a millimeter of distortion at this scale translate into real losses in sensitivity. So the antennas are painted white, that simple, ancient solution. White because white reflects sunlight rather than absorbing it, keeping the metal cooler and more uniform in temperature. The Colossus, thousands of tons of steel and aluminum, painted white like a garden shed because a giant kept cool is a giant that keeps its aim true. And then there is the wind. The Mojave can be still in the cool of the night, but it is not always so. And when the wind picks up, genuinely picks up, in the way that desert wind sometimes does, with nothing to stop it for miles in any direction, a 70-meter dish stops being a precision instrument and starts being a sail of nearly 4,000 square meters mounted on a rotating structure. The drag forces become enormous. The structure is not built to withstand an aggressive storm in a fully deployed position. So when the wind reaches a certain threshold, the dish is told to stow. It tilts to a safe, parked angle, nose pointed more toward the sky or toward the horizon, depending on the stow protocol, taking the wind at an angle that puts minimal stress on the structure, and it waits. The spacecraft it was tracking continues on without contact. The pass is lost. Sometimes that can be worked around, picked up by another site, or rescheduled. Sometimes the science is simply gone for that window. The desert has that authority. And in calmer times, when the structure needs maintenance, inspection, surface repairs, any of the work required to keep an antenna this large in operating condition, crews go up onto the dish, onto the curved surface itself. They walk across it, this bowl that could hold a baseball diamond, wearing the kind of shoes and harnesses you use when you work on a large curved structure in the middle of a desert. If you wanted to understand the scale of the thing, perhaps that image is the clearest one. A person, a human being, walking up the gentle slope of the reflecting surface with the desert stretching away below and the Mojave sky above, and the dish simply enormous around them, curving up on all sides, white, silent, still. A small creature tending a very large ear. The 70-meter dishes are pointed in two axes. The engineers call these azimuth and elevation, azimuth being the compass direction, the left and right sweep around the horizon, and elevation being the tilt upward from horizontal, the up and down. By controlling both together, the dish can be aimed at any point in the sky visible from its location. It can track smoothly as a spacecraft moves, the azimuth drive, and the elevation drive working in coordination, the oil film bearing letting the whole assembly follow a trajectory that was calculated days or weeks ago back at the Spaceflight Operations Facility in Pasadena. The mathematics of orbital mechanics translated through a pointing schedule enacted by pressurized oil and precision drives holding the great dish on target. There is something in that chain. From the equations worked out in Pasadena, through the schedules uplinked to the antenna, through the oil film bearing, all the way to the moment when a signal from a spacecraft billions of kilometers away arrives at the focal point of this enormous bowl. Something in that chain that, if you follow it with your attention, just quietly dissolves the boundary between the very large and the very small. The math, the oil, the paint, the signal, each link in the chain impossibly specific, impossibly precise, and the whole thing so ordinary in its way that the people who work here go home for dinner and come back in the morning as if this were a job like any other. Now, you might reasonably wonder, given how much we've spoken about the 70-meter giants, their enormity, their white-painted surfaces, their oil film bearings, whether the whole network is really just 3 enormous dishes and nothing else. It isn't. Not even close. The 70-meter antennas are the flagships, the ones that carry the most critical or demanding work, and they are irreplaceable in the network. But the everyday workhorses, the ones that handle the bulk of the daily traffic, that run the most sessions, that keep the most spacecraft in contact hour after hour, are a different class. They are 34-meter antennas, about 112 feet across, still enormous by any ordinary standards, and you could park several large houses inside one, but roughly half the diameter of the 70-meter giants, which means a considerably smaller collecting area and a somewhat reduced sensitivity. For many missions, many passes, at the distances and data rates involved, they are perfectly adequate. And because they are smaller, they are also faster to build, less expensive to construct and maintain, and more numerous. What makes the 34-meter antennas at the Deep Space Network particularly interesting is their design. They are called beam waveguide antennas, and the name describes their most distinctive feature. In a conventional large dish, the receiver, the device that actually picks up and amplifies the arriving radio waves, sits in the focal point above the dish, mounted on the strut structure, swinging around as the dish moves. That means all the delicate electronics live up in the structure, exposed to the elements, shifting in temperature as the sun moves, vibrating with every mechanical motion of the dish. Not ideal for instruments that need to be both extremely sensitive and extremely stable. In a beam waveguide antenna, the solution is elegant. The arriving radio signal is collected at the focal point as usual, but then instead of being detected right there, it is bounced down through a system of precisely shaped mirrors, through a tube that runs down the inside of the antenna support structure and into a room underground. The signal travels as a guided beam, reflected from mirror to mirror with extraordinary care, until it arrives, still coherent, still intact, in a climate-controlled room beneath the antenna where the receiving equipment sits in peace. Stable temperature. No vibration from the turning dish. No weather. A quiet, controlled environment for instruments that need to hear the universe's faintest whispers without distraction. So as the 34-meter dish turns above, tracking its spacecraft across the sky, the signal it collects is threading its way down through the structure, navigating the mirrors, arriving in the underground room, as if by a kind of architectural magic. Up above, motion and sky and desert. Down below, stillness, cool air, and electronics doing the careful work of listening. Think of it as a very long, very precise straw. The dish up top is the mouth of the straw, gathering the incoming radio energy. The tube and mirrors are the straw itself, running down through the structure. And the room underground is where the drink arrives. The signal, already impossibly faint, delivered intact after its journey from a spacecraft perhaps hundreds of millions of kilometers away, threading not just the immensity of space, but also the inside of an antenna structure, arriving in a basement in the Mojave Desert to be listened to. There is something about that image that, if you hold it for a moment, feels almost comically understated. A voice from across the solar system arriving in a basement, a spacecraft that has been traveling for decades, sending back its careful data, and the note arrives in a basement room in the California desert, where someone in a quiet underground space looks at a screen and says, "Yes, it's there. We have lock." And there are many of these antennas. Each complex, Goldstone, Madrid, Canberra, has several. The network at any given time has access to quite a number of 34-meter dishes spread across the 3 sites, each one independently steerable, each one capable of tracking a different spacecraft, each one sending that carefully guided beam down into its underground room. Which brings us to something the network can do that is worth pausing on, because sometimes a single dish, even a 34-meter one, even a 70-meter one, is not quite enough. The spacecraft is too far. The signal is too faint. The data rate that the mission needs is beyond what one dish can provide alone. What do? You combine them? The network calls this arraying. Multiple dishes pointed at the same spacecraft simultaneously, each one collecting the faint signal independently, and then the signals from all of them combined, added together carefully with attention to timing and phase, so they reinforce rather than cancel. The result is an effective collecting area larger than any single dish. Not as large as one dish that size would be, because combining signals always involves some technical losses, but substantially better than any one dish alone. You cannot always build a bigger ear, but you can arrange many ears to work together, and if you arrange them carefully enough, the result approaches the same effect. So on the nights when an aging spacecraft is particularly far, or a critical science observation needs the highest possible data rate, or a signal needs to be dragged up out of the noise with everything the network has, the schedulers may arrange multiple dishes at one complex, or even across complexes, to listen together. Several antennas spread across the desert, or spread across the world, all tilted at the same point in the sky, all threading their beams down into their respective underground rooms, all feeding their collected signals into the processing systems at the Spaceflight Operations Facility in Pasadena. A chorus of giant ears in the dark, listening as one. It is, in its way, one of the most quietly powerful images of collective human effort you could imagine. Not a single heroic machine, but many machines cooperating. The desert filled with turning white dishes, each one listening, all of them together making something capable of hearing a whisper from the edge of the solar system. Now, you might have noticed in all of this that we have been talking about 70-meter antennas as though they were always 70 meters wide. They were not always so. And the story of how they got there is worth telling gently, because it is a story about a particular kind of loyalty. When the Goldstone dish that would become DSS-14 was originally built, it was 64 meters across. 64 meters is not a small antenna. It was, at the time, one of the largest radio antennas in the world, built to track the missions of an early and optimistic era of space exploration. For years it served this purpose faithfully, receiving signals from missions across the solar system, doing its work in the quiet Mojave dark. But the Voyager spacecraft were launched in 1977, and they began to travel. both of them arcing outward through the solar system on trajectories designed to swing them past Jupiter, past Saturn, past Uranus and Neptune, using each planet's gravity as a slingshot to send them farther still. And as they traveled, their signals grew fainter. Not because anything had broken. Their transmitters still worked, still faithfully radiating their 20 watts of radio energy into space. But the inverse square law is unsparing. Double the distance, and the signal arriving at Earth has a quarter of the strength. The dishes that were sufficient to hear Voyager near Jupiter were no longer sufficient to hear Voyager near Neptune. And after Neptune, the spacecraft would keep going, farther and farther, forever. The network had a choice. It could accept a degraded link, receiving less data from Voyager as the spacecraft receded, or it could grow bigger ears. So the dish at Goldstone, the 64-meter DSS-14, was enlarged. Engineers figured out how to extend the reflecting surface, to add more area, to push the diameter out to 70 meters. The mathematics of radio sensitivity meant that even that additional 6 meters of diameter made a meaningful difference. More area, more collected signal, more data rescued from the noise. And the same enlargement was carried out at the other 70-meter dishes in the network. The network literally grew its ears to keep hearing its most famous travelers. That is not a metaphor or a poetic embellishment. That is what happened. The engineers looked at the trajectory of a spacecraft heading into the outer darkness, calculated how faint the signal would become, and then built bigger dishes to match. An act of engineering, yes, but also something that reads from a certain angle like an act of determination not to lose the thread, not to let the connection go quiet just because the distance grew. Voyager 1 is still traveling, farther now than any human-made object has ever been. And DSS-14, enlarged from 64 meters to 70, still listens for it on its nights of duty, the oil film bearing turning the great white dish slowly under the Mojave stars, keeping faith with a machine launched almost 50 years ago. There is a particular kind of patience in that image if you let it settle. A dish built to hear something very faint, then made larger to hear it when it grew fainter still, now keeping watch, decades after the spacecraft it listens to has left the solar system itself, crossing the boundary into interstellar space. The dish has outlived the era it was built for, and it is still listening. And that, when you think about it, is the steady, unhurried nature of all of this, or the network as a whole, these great dishes turning through their nights. They are not in a hurry. The signals they listen for come at whatever pace the laws of physics allow. The spacecraft they track move at speeds that, measured against the scale of the solar system, are agonizingly slow. The data that trickles back from the most distant probes comes at a rate that would have felt antique to even an early home computer. There is no rushing any of it. The network sits with the slowness. It accepts the pace that physics sets and keeps its watch within those constraints, patiently, with great precision, for as long as it takes. So here, in the Mojave night, in the Spanish Valley, outside the Australian capital, 3 complexes of dishes are turning. Their surfaces reflect what little starlight falls on them. Their oil film bearings let them swing with an almost eerie ease. Their beams guide the arriving signals down into underground rooms where careful instruments wait. And from all this enormous, delicate, patient machinery, something quite small is extracted. Something you would not believe if you were told its scale in advance. But that is where we are going next, quietly, into the real heart of the strangeness, into just how faint the thing is that all of this equipment is straining to hear. So settle in just a little more. The dishes are turning, the signals are on their way, and the numbers, when they arrive, will be extraordinary. The 70-meter dish at Goldstone DSS-14 is the one most people would point to first if they came to the Mojave and asked to see the largest thing here. And it is worth taking a moment with it, slowly, because the scale of it doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in pieces. You notice the legs first, and the support structure, and then the dish itself. Curved, white, tilted toward whatever patch of sky it happens to be tracking at that hour. And then, almost as an afterthought, you realize you could lay a baseball infield inside it. The pitcher's mound, the bases, the warning track, all of it would fit within the reflective bowl of that single antenna. The surface area of the reflector alone comes to around 3,150 square meters, a substantial piece of land turned on its side and aimed at the sky. DSS-14, nicknamed Mars, has been a fixture of the Goldstone complex for decades. The nickname is not accidental. This dish has had a long, particular relationship with the Red Planet, though its career spans far beyond any single destination. It has listened to spacecraft orbiting Jupiter, probes dropping through the clouds of Venus, machines coasting through interplanetary space on trajectories that took years to compute. The name is a memory, a nod to early work, and the dish itself has outgrown any single label. But size, even at this scale, is only part of the picture. What makes the 70-meter antennas extraordinary is not merely that they are large, it is the combination of what they weigh and what they can do despite that weight. The full structure, dish, framework, the machinery of the mount, comes to somewhere in the region of 2,700 to 3,000 tons. That is a reasonable estimate for a small ship, a coastal cargo vessel, something built to cut through water, not turn gracefully in the desert air. And yet this structure, this colossus, can be pointed with a precision measured in thousandths of a degree. Its aim is more careful than almost any mechanical thing you are likely to encounter in ordinary life. It tracks a spacecraft moving through space, re-aiming continuously as the Earth rotates beneath it, holding its target in the cone of its attention with a steadiness that is, honestly, a little difficult to square with the mass involved. The reason it can do this is the oil. The entire rotating structure, all those thousands of tons, rides on a hydrostatic bearing. A thin, pressurized layer of oil, only fractions of a millimeter thick, sits between the dish and the surface it rests on. That film of oil holds the weight, and because it holds the weight, the dish floats. Not in any dramatic sense, not visibly, but the friction that would otherwise resist its turning is largely gone, replaced by the fluid layer. And so the great antenna swings with a smoothness that engineers describe as almost frictionless. Something weighing as much as a small ship moves like a compass needle finding north. It is one of those details that asks you to sit with it for a moment. The oil film itself is thinner than a human hair is wide. And on that invisible layer, thousands of tons turn to face the stars. The dish is built to be steerable in two axes. Azimuth, the direction it faces horizontally, and elevation, the angle it tilts upward. Both movements together let it cover nearly the whole sky above the horizon, tracking a spacecraft's arc from rising to setting. As the Earth turns through the night, the dish compensates, slowly, continuously, holding its lock on a faint signal that would otherwise drift out of the beam. It is painted white. This, too, is not aesthetic. The Mojave sun in summer is relentless, and an unprotected dish would absorb that heat unevenly, one side warming faster than another, and the structure would flex, subtly, but enough to affect the geometry of the reflector surface, enough to throw off the aim. White paint is a simple, old solution. Keep the structure cool. Keep it from warping. Keep the aim true. In high winds, the dish stows. It tilts to a safe, parked position because a structure this large, this curved, catches moving air the way a sail catches wind. The antenna that in calm conditions turns as gently as anything in the desert will, in the wrong weather, become something a wind can push against with enormous force. so it parks, it waits. It is a machine with an awareness of its own vulnerability, or at least its engineers have built that awareness in on its behalf. Crews can walk the surface of it. Maintenance requires this occasionally. People moving across the curved white expanse, checking the panels, inspecting what needs inspecting. It is a strange image if you let yourself picture it. A human figure on a landscape that is simultaneously a machine and a kind of landscape, up there among the desert heat and the open sky, the whole dish tilted at whatever angle the schedule required. The 70-meter dishes are the most prominent members of the network, but they are not the only members, and on most ordinary days they are not doing most of the work. That quieter, steadier work falls to the 34-meter antennas, the beam waveguide dishes. There are more of them, and their design solves a particular problem in an elegant way. When a dish moves, when it tilts and swings to track a spacecraft, everything attached to it moves too. If you put delicate receiving equipment directly on the dish, that equipment has to tolerate constant motion, changing orientation, the subtle mechanical stresses of being part of a structure in slow, continuous rotation. This is not ideal for instruments that need to be kept extraordinarily stable and in some cases extraordinarily cold. The beam waveguide design routes around this. The signal arriving at the dish surface is guided inward through a series of carefully shaped mirrors, directed down through the support structure, through a tube, and into a room underground. The sensitive receivers, the cryogenic amplifiers cooled to near absolute zero, the equipment that actually does the work of detecting the signal. All of it sits in a stable, temperature-controlled basement, stationary, while the dish above it turns. The signal finds its way down. The instruments never have to move. There is something quietly satisfying about this arrangement. The dish faces the sky and gathers. The room below holds steady and listens. Between them, a path of mirrors carries the faint signal from the one to the other. And when even a 34-meter dish isn't quite enough, when the signal is faint and the mission demands more sensitivity than one antenna can provide, the network has another answer. Arraying multiple dishes pointed at the same spacecraft, their signals combined, their separate collections added together to produce what a single, larger antenna might have gathered alone. Several smaller ears working in concert, treating their combined effort as one bigger effort. It is cooperative listening, and it has been used for some of the most challenging receptions in the network's history. The enlargement of DSS-14 itself tells a version of this story. The dish began its life with a diameter of 64 meters. That is already an imposing structure by any measure. But as the Voyager spacecraft moved farther and farther from the Sun, their signals grew fainter. Not because anything was wrong with them, but simply because of distance. The energy of a radio wave spreads outward from its source in every direction, thinning as it covers more and more surface area, and by the time it reaches a receiver, billions of kilometers away, there is barely anything left of it. The network needed to gather more of it, so the dish was enlarged. The reflector surface was extended, the structure modified, until DSS-14 had grown from 64 meters to 70. The network literally made its ears bigger, specifically to keep hearing Voyager. It stretched to maintain contact with a machine it had sent into the dark, and it succeeded. The dish that had seen Voyager depart, in a sense, reshaped itself to go on hearing from it as the years and then the decades accumulated. That is the scale of commitment embedded in this infrastructure. The dishes were not designed and built once and left to age. They grew, adapted, were upgraded because the missions they served were still going, were going farther, were asking for more. The network and the spacecraft it tracks have aged together, each one pulling the other forward into the next decade. And now, having followed the dishes in their size and their history, having stood inside the idea of what it takes just to build and aim these structures, it is time to ask the quietest and most astonishing question of all. What exactly are they listening for? Because here is the thing, the signals the Deep Space Network receives from its most distant spacecraft are not weak in the way that a radio station sounds weak if you drive too far from the city. They are not weak the way a phone call sounds weak when the battery is dying. They are weak in a way that is genuinely difficult to hold in the mind, a weakness so extreme that it sits outside ordinary experience entirely, like trying to imagine the age of the universe by counting seconds. You can say the number, but the number doesn't quite land. So let's approach it gently, the way you'd approach something in the dark, carefully, slowly, one step at a time. When a signal from a distant spacecraft finally arrives at the dish, after traveling for hours, or in Voyager's case more than 22 hours, the total power it carries into the receiver is on the order of a billionth of a billionth of a watt. Not a watt, not a thousandth of a watt, a billionth of a billionth. Engineers write that as 10 to the power of negative 18, or sometimes lower, depending on the spacecraft and the distance. It is a number so small that ordinary language has no comfortable home for it. One way to feel this, and I say feel deliberately, because understanding it intellectually is only part of the experience, is to think about all of the signals that have ever arrived at DSN receivers from all of the deep space spacecraft the network has tracked across its entire history. Decades of transmissions. Voyagers and Pioneers and Cassini and Galileo and New Horizons and all the Mars missions and all the others, all of that accumulated across all of those years, every downlink pass, every precious data stream from billions of kilometers away. The total energy gathered from all of them combined is often described as less than the energy of a single snowflake hitting the ground. A snowflake landing softly on your sleeve. That is what the network has been collecting. And yet, and this is the part that might keep you gently awake if you think about it too hard, it is enough. It is enough because of the extraordinary ingenuity of what happens once that vanishingly small whisper of energy arrives at the dish. Because receiving it is only half the challenge, the other half is not losing it in noise. Think about what warmth is at the scale of electronics. Every component in a receiver that is sitting at room temperature is vibrating, its electrons jostling around in the ordinary thermal motion of matter at ordinary temperatures. And those jostling electrons produce a faint, random electrical signal. It is tiny, but it is not nothing. And when the signal you are trying to detect is itself a billionth of a watt, not nothing is a very serious problem. The thermal noise of ordinary warm electronics would drown the spacecraft's whisper, the way a room full of conversation would drown a single person whispering from across the street. So the network cools its receivers, not just a little, down to temperatures only a few degrees above absolute zero using liquid helium. Absolute zero is the coldest temperature that physics permits, the point at which thermal motion would theoretically stop entirely at around minus 273 degrees Celsius. The receivers don't quite reach that, but they come extraordinarily close, just a few degrees above nothing. At those temperatures, the thermal jostling of the electronics slows to nearly nothing, and the noise floor drops so low that the whisper from a spacecraft billions of kilometers away can rise above it, faintly but detectably, like a single candle visible in a very dark room. These cryogenically cooled devices are called low-noise amplifiers. They are delicate and carefully engineered, and they are the reason the network can hear what it hears. The liquid helium that cools them has to be maintained and replenished, part of the ongoing life support of the antenna systems. Somewhere at this moment, at Goldstone or Madrid or Canberra, a cooling system is quietly doing its job, keeping something close to the coldest possible state so that a faint message from the edge of the solar system can make it through. If you want a way to feel what that sensitivity means in more human terms, there is an image that captures it well. The network is sensitive enough, and this is offered as an illustration of the order of magnitude, not a literal specification, but it communicates the scale beautifully, that it could detect a transmitter weaker than a cell phone if that cell phone was sitting out at the distance of Saturn. Saturn, the ringed planet, somewhere between roughly 70 and 90 minutes away at the speed of light, depending on where the two planets are in their orbits, which we will come back to very shortly. That distance, and a signal no stronger than what your phone puts out when it's looking for a tower. That is what the network is built to hear. The signals themselves travel in specific radio frequency ranges, and the choice of frequency matters a great deal to how much information can be carried and how well the signal holds up over the journey. For much of the network's history, the primary bands have been S-band and X-band. Those are the names given to specific frequency ranges within the microwave portion of the radio spectrum, defined by international agreement. S-band occupies roughly 2 to 4 GHz. X-band sits higher, around 8 to 12 GHz. Higher frequency means shorter wavelength, and shorter wavelength means you can pack more information into the same signal. More data, faster, through the same sized dish. More recently, the network has been moving toward K-band, which sits higher still, around 26 to 40 GHz. K-band is like opening a wider pipe. The same antenna can carry significantly more data when operating at K-band than at X-band, which matters enormously for missions generating large volumes of science data. High-resolution images, detailed atmospheric measurements, all the rich information a modern spacecraft can collect. The catch is that K-band signals are more sensitive to water vapor in the atmosphere, which is one reason weather at the ground station is a practical consideration, and one reason having 3 sites in different climates and different geographies is a genuine advantage. If it is raining heavily at Canberra, Madrid or Goldstone might have clearer skies. The network's redundancy is not only about Earth's rotation, it is also about weather. But all of this, cryogenic cooling, the low noise amplifiers, the carefully chosen frequencies, the enormous dish surfaces gathering every photon they can, all of it is in service of a relationship that is defined, above all other things, by one immovable constraint: time. Specifically the time it takes light to travel. Nothing in the universe moves faster than light. That is not a conjecture or a theory that might be revised. It is, as best as physics can determine, a fundamental feature of reality. And light, for all its astonishing speed, 300,000 kilometers per second, is not instantaneous. At the distances involved in deep space communication, the delay between sending a signal and having it arrive becomes not a nuisance, but a central fact of life. The architecture of every mission, the shape of every conversation between Earth and spacecraft, is built around this unavoidable pause. Let's start close and then move outward. Our own Sun is about 150 million kilometers from Earth on average. At the speed of light, that distance translates to 8 minutes and 20 seconds. So when you look at the Sun, please don't actually look directly at the Sun, you are seeing it not as it is now, but as it was 8 minutes and 20 seconds ago. The Sun you see is always a little in the past. There is nothing unusual about this from the Sun's perspective. It is simply that light takes time to travel and the universe does not make exceptions. 8 minutes and 20 seconds is not so long that it changes your day, but it is a hint, a small foretaste of what happens as you move farther out. Mars is the closest planet that humanity has sent rovers and landers to visit. It is also our most actively communicated with planetary neighbor, with multiple orbiters and surface rovers generating data that has to travel home through the deep space network. But Mars is not a fixed distance away. Earth and Mars move in their own orbits around the Sun, and sometimes they are relatively close. At opposition, When they are on the same side of the Sun, the distance can be as little as about 54 million kilometers. Other times, they are almost on opposite sides of the solar system, as far as 400 million kilometers apart. That range of distances translates directly into a range of signal travel times. At the closest, a radio signal from Earth reaches Mars in roughly 4 minutes. At the farthest, it takes about 24 minutes. Most of the time, a command sent to a Mars rover takes somewhere between 4 and 24 minutes to arrive, often around 10 to 15 minutes when Mars is at a typical distance. And then the rover does whatever it does, and if it sends a response, that response takes the same amount of time to come back. Think about what that means in practice. A rover driver on Earth cannot steer a rover on Mars the way you might steer a remote-controlled car in your living room, watching and adjusting in real time. By the time you saw a rock that was about to be driven over, the rover would already have driven over it, or stopped itself if its hazard avoidance software caught it, 8 to 24 minutes ago. The rover itself has to be smart enough to navigate with some degree of independence, and the people operating it from Earth have to plan sequences of actions in advance, send them, and then wait to see what happened. It is a kind of patience that requires its own discipline and its own particular attentiveness. You do not react. You plan, you send, you wait. Moving farther out, Jupiter, the largest planet in the solar system, a gas giant of such size that more than 1,300 Earths could fit inside it, sits much farther from the Sun and therefore much farther from us. A signal to Jupiter takes between roughly 35 and 52 minutes to arrive one way, again depending on the geometry of the two planets' orbits. A conversation with a spacecraft at Jupiter is not a matter of a few minutes. Send a command, wait an hour, see what happened. The mission teams that operated the Galileo spacecraft at Jupiter, or who currently oversee the Juno mission in Jupiter's orbit, have spent years operating inside that rhythm. Patience becomes not an occasional requirement, but the fundamental texture of the work. Saturn is farther still. That ringed giant, whose distance also varies as the planet's orbit, puts a signal travel time of roughly 70 to 90 minutes for a one-way trip. A round-trip communication to a spacecraft at Saturn, if you were to ask it a question and wait for the answer, would take somewhere around 2.5 to 3 hours. Send your question in the morning, and by the time you received an answer, it would be nearly lunchtime. This is why the illustration of the cell phone signal being detectable at Saturn captures something important. Not just the sensitivity it implies, but also the patience it requires. You listen for something that left Saturn an hour and a half ago, and you will not be able to reply to it and hear back for another 3 hours after that. The Cassini spacecraft spent 13 years in orbit around Saturn, and throughout that time, every command, every uplink, every piece of science data it returned came through the deep space network at those delays. The scientists and engineers who worked on Cassini did not find this paralyzing. They found ways to work within it, but it is a different kind of relationship with a machine than anything we experience on Earth. The spacecraft was, in a very real sense, on its own. It executed sequences it had been given, and then it reported back on what had happened, and Earth listened and planned the next sequence. And then there is Voyager. Both Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were launched in 1977. They were designed to tour the outer solar system, using the gravitational pull of the giant planets to fling them progressively farther out. A celestial slingshot sequence that took advantage of a rare alignment of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune that happens once every 175 years or so. They were not designed to last indefinitely. They were not designed to still be transmitting in the 2020s, and yet here we are. Voyager 1 has traveled farther from the Sun than any other human-made object in history. It has crossed into interstellar space, the region beyond the bubble of solar wind that surrounds our solar system. And it is still going, still transmitting, still being heard. But the signal from Voyager 1 now takes more than 22 hours to reach Earth, one way. 22 hours at the speed of light, which is the fastest anything can travel. And yet the universe is so large that even that speed requires most of a day to cover the ground between Voyager and us. If you were to send Voyager 1 a message right now, some greeting, some command, some small acknowledgement, you would have to wait more than 22 hours for it to arrive. And then you would wait another 22 or more hours for any response to return. A round-trip exchange with Voyager 1, a simple hello and reply, takes nearly 2 full days. Sit with that for a moment if you like. There is no hurry. The network is not in a hurry either. Somewhere, a 70-meter dish is pointed very precisely at the part of the sky where the math says Voyager 1 is right now. Not where it appears to be, accounting for light travel time, but where it actually will be, where the geometry and the physics put it. And it is listening. And a signal is arriving faintly, having traveled for more than 22 hours through interstellar space to land in that dish, carrying news of what was happening at the spacecraft more than a day ago. This is one of the strange and beautiful features of listening to something so far away. You are never hearing the present, you are hearing the past. The spacecraft you are tracking is not where your screen shows it to be right now. It is where it will be 22 hours from now, when the signal arriving right now is telling you what was happening 22 hours ago. It is a little like receiving a letter that was mailed from a very remote place, except the letter travels at the speed of light and still takes almost a day. And this delay has real consequences for how spacecraft are operated. Because if something goes wrong aboard a deep space probe, if a sensor malfunctions, if a computer encounters an unexpected state, if a collision with a tiny particle perturbs something, the people on Earth will not know about it until the signal carrying that information arrives. And that signal for Voyager left more than 22 hours ago. The problem, whatever it was, happened 22 hours in the past. Earth cannot intervene in the present moment. By the time the news arrives and engineers can assess it and formulate a response and send it, the spacecraft is now another 22 plus hours further along. This is why deep space spacecraft must be, to a significant degree, capable of looking after themselves. They carry onboard software designed to detect anomalies and respond autonomously. To enter what is called safe mode, a protective state in which the spacecraft shuts down non-essential systems, orients itself to keep its solar panels or power source in order, and points its antenna toward Earth, waiting. Safe mode is the spacecraft's way of saying, something happened, I'm not sure what, I'm taking care of myself, please respond when you can. And then it waits across tens or hundreds of millions of kilometers for Earth to hear the message, understand the situation, and reply. By the time Earth sends a response, the spacecraft has been waiting for many hours or many days in its cautious, self-preserving posture. And then it waits again for that response to arrive. The entire process is built around an acceptance that real-time control is not possible, that the machine must have enough intelligence and enough autonomy to survive the silence between transmissions. It is an engineering requirement, but it is also, in a quieter way, an expression of trust. The people who build and operate these spacecraft have to trust, in a very deep sense, that the machines they send into the dark will know how to take care of themselves. There is something strangely comforting about that in the small hours of the night. Not every system requires constant supervision. Some things can be trusted to look after themselves, to wait quietly, to hold steady until communication is restored. And so we arrive at the work itself, at what actually happens during one of those scheduled windows of contact and the pass. Because everything we have talked about so far, the dishes, and their engineering, and the faintness of the signals and the patience of the delays, all of it comes together in those pass windows. A spacecraft has been allocated time on a particular antenna. The dish has been moved, slowly and precisely, to where the math says the spacecraft will rise above the horizon. And then contact begins. A single radio link to a deep space spacecraft does three things at once. The first is the uplink, sending commands from Earth to the spacecraft. This is Earth's voice in the conversation. The commands might tell the spacecraft to point a camera in a particular direction, or to turn on a specific instrument, or to adjust its orientation, or any number of other instructions that guide what the mission does next. The uplink carries intent. The second is the downlink, receiving data from the spacecraft back at Earth. This is the spacecraft's voice. Science data, images, measurements, telemetry about the health of the spacecraft's own systems, all of this flows back through the downlink. The downlink carries knowledge. The third is tracking, and this one is perhaps less obvious but no less important. The network doesn't simply talk to spacecraft, it precisely measures them. It listens to the signal in a way that extracts information about where the spacecraft is and how fast it is moving. One of the ways it does this is through the Doppler effect, the same phenomenon that makes a passing siren seem to rise in pitch as it approaches and fall as it recedes. When a spacecraft is moving toward Earth, the radio waves it emits are slightly compressed, their frequency pushed a little higher. When it is moving away, the waves are stretched, frequency pushed a little lower. The change is tiny, but the network's receivers are extraordinarily sensitive to it, and by measuring that shift precisely, engineers can determine the spacecraft's velocity along the line of sight from Earth, how fast it is moving toward or away from us, to a precision of a fraction of a millimeter per second. Think about that. A fraction of a millimeter per second, measured across billions of kilometers. The spacecraft might be 10 billion kilometers away, a number so large it barely registers as a distance, and yet the network can determine its speed to within something slower than the pace at which your fingernails grow. This is not a curiosity. This is how spacecraft are navigated. Knowing the velocity precisely, combined with knowing the position, allows mission teams to track the spacecraft's trajectory and, when necessary, to calculate the tiny thruster burns needed to correct it. The navigation that keeps a mission on course, that aimed Cassini correctly into Saturn's orbit, that pointed New Horizons' camera at Pluto's heart as the spacecraft swept past at 45,000 kilometers per hour, is built on these extraordinarily precise Doppler measurements taken through the Deep Space Network. Alongside the Doppler measurement, the network also measures distance, the actual range, to the spacecraft through a technique called ranging. This works by encoding a precisely timed pattern into the uplink signal sent to the spacecraft, which then turns around and retransmits that pattern on the downlink. Earth receives the signal back and measures very precisely how long the round trip took. Since the speed of light is known with extraordinary accuracy, that travel time becomes a ruler. Multiply the time by the speed of light, divide by 2, and you have the distance to the spacecraft measured with an accuracy that can be better than a kilometer, even across interplanetary distances. The timing has to be accurate to billionths of a second, which is why the hydrogen-Mars atomic clocks at each complex matter so much, but we will come to them in a little while. The ranging and the Doppler measurements together paint a precise picture of where a spacecraft is and how it is moving. They are the invisible geometry that makes navigation possible across the solar system, and sometimes the tracking extends not just to the spacecraft's position and velocity, but to the signals it carries as it passes through or near various environments. A spacecraft passing behind a planet, for instance, sends its signal through the planet's atmosphere on the way to Earth, and the way the signal bends and changes as it passes through that atmosphere carries scientific information about the atmosphere's density and composition. The network can listen to those subtle changes and help extract science from them. The radio signal itself becomes a measurement instrument. But there is a moment in certain missions when all of that careful instrumentation and precise measurement gives way to something simpler and more tense. During the most critical phases of a mission, the landing of a rover on Mars, the passage of a spacecraft through a planetary encounter, the final minutes of an entry through an atmosphere, the downlink from the spacecraft often cannot carry the full richness of science data. The data rates are too slow, the link too fragile, the margins too tight. What the network receives instead in those moments is a carrier tone. A carrier tone is exactly what it sounds like. A single, steady radio signal, no modulation, no information, no data. Just the signal itself, present or absent, its frequency shifting slightly with the spacecraft's motion. It is the most minimal proof of life a spacecraft can offer. I am still here, I am still transmitting. Something in the signal's behavior tells you roughly what is happening. During the entry, descent, and landing sequences for Mars rovers, the period sometimes called the 7 minutes of terror, because the entry and landing sequence from the top of the atmosphere to the surface takes about 7 minutes and happens faster than any command from Earth could intervene, the entire sequence pre-programmed and executed by the spacecraft alone. The network is listening for that carrier tone. Engineers in the mission operations room are watching the signal's behavior, tracking frequency shifts, noting whether the tone is present and steady or has changed or disappeared. They cannot steer anything. They cannot send help. They can only listen, and in that listening try to understand what is happening 9 or 10 light minutes away, a story already written, playing out in the received signal now. There is a particular quality to that kind of listening. It is not passive. It is enormously focused, deeply attentive, but fundamentally without the ability to act. The outcome has already been determined. The only question is when Earth will learn it. And so the controllers watch the carrier tone, reading it the way you might read a face in an uncertain moment, looking for signs, for reassurance, for the small signals that say things are going as planned. And then, if everything has gone right, the carrier tone shifts or strengthens or is replaced by the richer signal of a spacecraft that has survived and is sending home. And in the room, there is a change in the air. Not because anything in that moment changed what happened on Mars. It already happened 10 minutes ago or more. But because Earth now knows. That is the shape of a pass, uplink and downlink and tracking, the 3 threads of a conversation that is never quite simultaneous, always delayed, always patient, and yet continuous. One spacecraft after another, one dish after another, one shift after another. The network maintains that patient, attentive thread, keeping faith with the machines it sent into the dark. And while the signals are faint, almost incomprehensibly faint, and the delays long, the work of a pass is not solitary or silent on the human side. At any given moment in the network's daily schedule, there are dozens of spacecraft needing time on its dishes. The schedule is a careful negotiation because there are more missions than there are dishes, and every hour of antenna time is genuinely precious. It is described in NASA's planning documents as a real bottleneck for deep space exploration. Not the rockets, not the spacecraft hardware, but the listening, the capacity to hear. What gets scheduled when is a complex optimization, factoring in which spacecraft are in critical phases, which antennas are best suited to which frequency bands, what maintenance windows are needed, and the geometries of which complexes can see which spacecraft at any given time. A spacecraft in a low southern declination, one that passes through the southern sky, can only be tracked from Canberra in Australia. A spacecraft in the northern sky might be accessible from Goldstone or Madrid, but not Canberra. The 3 sites' different latitudes give the network coverage across the full celestial sphere, but they also mean that some missions are bound to specific complexes more than others. And among all those missions, two very old ones, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, launched in 1977, now the most distant human-made objects in existence, require their own particular consideration. They are weak, they are far. Their data rates are among the slowest in the network's entire portfolio. And yet they are irreplaceable. There is no second chance with Voyager. When those spacecraft are gone, they are gone. And so the network makes time for them, carefully, steadily, pass after pass. The signals the network receives from the Voyagers carry data at only a trickle, a few tens of bits per second in some cases, slower, far slower than the earliest home modems from the 1990s. At those rates, a single science record, not a high-resolution image but a modest data file, can take a very long time to transfer. The information arrives the way fine rain fills a bucket, unhurried, continuous, patient. And the network listens to it all carefully, losing as little as possible because there is no opportunity to ask the Voyagers to resend at higher speed. This is the only speed there is. And every year the trickle narrows a little more, not because of distance alone, because the Voyager's power sources are slowly fading. Both spacecraft carry radioisotope thermoelectric generators, devices that convert the heat from the natural decay of plutonium-238 into electricity. They require no sunlight, no nuclear reactor, no chemical fuel. They run on the slow, steady warmth of radioactive decay. But that decay is gradual and irreversible. Each year, the generators produce a little less power than the year before. And as the power budget shrinks, the engineers who care for these spacecraft face a set of difficult choices. Every instrument aboard a spacecraft requires power. Science instruments, heaters that keep components from freezing in the cold of deep space, the onboard computers, the radio transmitters. All of it draws from the same slowly shrinking budget. And so over the years, the Voyager mission team has made the deliberate and careful decision to switch off instruments one by one, to sacrifice science in order to preserve the one capability that matters most, the radio. As long as the radio transmits, the network can hear the spacecraft. As long as the network can hear, the Voyagers are not gone, they are just very far away. So the decisions are made, an instrument goes dark, the power it was using flows to the transmitter instead, the trickle continues, and somewhere at Goldstone or Madrid or Canberra, a dish is pointed at the precise coordinates where the math says Voyager 1 or Voyager 2 will be, and it listens and the signal arrives 22 hours or more after it departed, carrying news from the edge of the solar system. This is a vigil, a genuine vigil in the oldest sense of the word, watchful, patient, sustained, not passive. The network is actively doing things, measuring, recording, transmitting, maintaining lock, but fundamentally steady. Steady in the face of enormous distance and enormous time, the kind of steadiness that does not require drama or urgency, only attention. And that steadiness, that unbroken attentiveness, has been maintained since 1958, since before most of the spacecraft currently in the solar system existed, since before most of the people who operate the network today were born. The conversation began and it has never quite stopped. There have been individual passes that ended and new ones that began. There have been upgrades and shutdowns and rebuilds. But the network as a whole, the commitment to listening, has been continuous. You can watch a small piece of it right now, or rather, at any moment you choose to look. NASA runs a live dashboard called DSN Now, and it shows in real time which antenna at which complex is talking to which spacecraft. It is a quietly remarkable thing to look at. The dishes are labeled, the spacecraft are named. A line connects them, showing the current signal, whether it is uplink or downlink, what frequency band it is using, the current light time delay to the spacecraft in question. Mars, 32 minutes right now. New Horizons more than 8 hours. Voyager 1, 22 hours and change. It updates in real time. And it is, in a way, a kind of window. A window onto the network's endless, patient day. Somewhere in that daily rhythm, something else is happening that is easy to overlook but deeply important. Not the signals themselves, but the time. The keeping of time. Because ranging and Doppler, the two primary tools the network uses to measure where a spacecraft is and how fast it is moving, depend entirely on knowing time with extraordinary precision. When the network sends a ranging signal to a spacecraft and waits for it to return, it is measuring the elapsed time of that round trip. That measurement is converted into a distance, but the conversion is only as good as the clock doing the timing. If your clock is even a tiny bit wrong, the distance is wrong. A clock error of 1 microsecond, 1 millionth of a second, translates at the speed of light to a position error of about 300 meters. At the distances involved in deep space navigation, timing errors accumulate into navigational errors very quickly. This is why each of the three complexes maintains its own ultra-stable frequency and timing reference. At the heart of those references are hydrogen mesa atomic clocks, devices that use the quantum mechanical behavior of hydrogen atoms to keep time with almost unimaginable stability. A hydrogen maser does not tick like a mechanical clock or even oscillate like a quartz crystal. It exploits the fact that hydrogen atoms naturally oscillate when suitably prepared at a very precise and stable frequency, about 1.42 gigahertz, a number that does not change from atom to atom or from moment to moment in the way that any macroscopic pendulum or spring eventually does. The maser locks onto that atomic rhythm and uses it to keep time. The result is a clock that loses or gains less than a nanosecond, less than a billionth of a second over a period of days or weeks. All three sites, Goldstone, Madrid, Canberra, maintain these clocks, and they are kept synchronized with each other and with the Spaceflight Operations Facility in Pasadena, the nerve center that coordinates the whole network, so that when a ranging measurement is made at Goldstone at a given moment and another is made at Canberra a few minutes later, the two measurements are talking about the same time to a degree of precision that no ordinary clock could approach. The network is, among other things, a vast shared act of timekeeping. Three complexes spread around the world, each maintaining its own standard of now, all of them synchronized into a single agreed present, so that the measurements made thousands of kilometers apart can be compared and combined to navigate a spacecraft hundreds of millions of kilometers away. There is something almost meditative about that image in the small hours of the night. Three places on Earth, all keeping the same time, all listening for the same faint signals, all part of one continuous, careful attention. The Earth turns, and the watch turns with it, the three complexes handing the thread between them so it never drops. One sight in sunlight, while another is in darkness. One ending a shift, while another begins. And always, somewhere, the dishes are pointed outward, aimed at the coordinates where the math says a spacecraft will be. Sometimes, before it has even risen above the horizon, the dish moving to meet it, trusting the calculation, trusting that the whisper will arrive. That image, a dish aimed at empty sky, waiting for a signal that has not yet come over the horizon, is one of the loveliest small facts about how the network actually works. The pointing of an antenna pass is calculated far in advance, from the spacecraft's known trajectory and the known rotation of the Earth and the known position of the antenna. The math is precise enough that the dish can begin moving to its predicted position before the spacecraft rises, before there is anything there to receive. And then, if the predictions are right, and they almost always are, the spacecraft comes over the horizon and the signal arrives and the network acquires lock. Acquiring lock. That phrase used by operators to describe the moment when the receiver locks onto a spacecraft signal and holds it. there is a counterpart, losing lock, the moment the signal falls below the horizon or is interrupted and the thread is, temporarily, in most cases, broken. Between those two moments is the pass, and the quiet drama of a console shift is very often simply keeping lock, watching the signal hold, noting its strength and frequency, making sure the thread remains unbroken. Hours can pass in that quiet watching. Overnight passes on distant spacecraft, Voyager, New Horizons, missions far from the Sun, can run for 8, 10, 12 hours. The dish turns slowly to track the spacecraft across the sky as the Earth rotates. The signal holds, faint but present. The operator watches. Occasionally, there is something to do. A command to send, a parameter to adjust, a reading to log. But much of it is simply attentiveness, waiting and watching and keeping the thread. Operators who have worked long overnight passes sometimes describe the experience as deeply calm, a single, steady signal, the spacecraft silent and far, the dish moving slowly above them in the dark, the desert quiet at Goldstone, or the eucalyptus-scented hills around Tidbinbilla, or the dry plains near Robledo de Chavela. Stars overhead if there are no clouds. And down in the control room, a screen showing the signal. Present, holding, steady. That steadiness is the work. That is the vigil. And it is happening right now. Think about where the schedule begins on any ordinary day. Not with a crisis. Not with a launch or a landing or a moment of triumph. Just with a list. The Deep Space Network runs on a schedule, and that schedule is one of the most quietly extraordinary documents produced anywhere on Earth on any given day. It is a timetable for conversations across the solar system. It says, this antenna at this hour will be pointed at this spacecraft. This dish will hand off to that dish. This mission will get 40 minutes. This one will get 6 hours. It is a negotiation between dozens of spacecraft and a handful of giant ears, and it is remade carefully every single day. On any given day, the network is tracking dozens of spacecraft at once. Dozens. Mars orbiters circling the red planet in their slow ellipses. Landers and rovers on the surface waiting to uplink their findings. Probes studying the Sun from close in and from far out. Missions threading through the asteroid belt or skimming past moons of Jupiter or drifting in the long quiet beyond Neptune. And at the very edge of that list, barely legible, two names that have been there longer than almost anyone working the consoles has been alive. Voyager 1, Voyager 2, both launched in 1977 in the late summer of that year, when the planetary geometry was just right for a grand tour of the outer solar system. Both still out there, both still faintly calling home. They are the most distant human-made objects in existence, and somewhere on the daily schedule, each of them gets its window. That window matters more than almost anything else on the list, because Voyager 1, as of recent years, is so far away that its signal takes more than 22 hours to reach Earth one way, not 22 minutes, hours. If you sent a message right now, you would wait more than 2 days for a reply, one day for your words to travel out, and more than 1 day for an answer to travel back. A round-trip greeting across that distance takes nearly 2 full days. And yet, the network listens. There is also a live dashboard, freely available to anyone with an internet connection, that shows exactly what the network is doing at any given moment. It is called DSN Now, and it sits at a NASA website that you could pull up right now, in the dark, if you were curious. It shows a simple diagram, 3 sites arranged around a globe, labeled Goldstone, Madrid, Canberra. Lines reaching out from each site towards small labeled icons representing spacecraft, little arcs of connection live updating every few seconds. If you looked at it tonight, you would see which antenna is talking to which probe, what frequency they are using, how far away the spacecraft is, how long the signal takes to travel. You might see a line stretching out toward Voyager 1 or toward New Horizons, somewhere past Pluto in the cold outer dark. You might see Mars listed 3 or 4 times, different orbiters, different windows, different dishes, the whole solar system condensed into a simple diagram, updating quietly in the glow of a screen. It is one of the most calming things to look at before sleep. But here is the part of the daily schedule that carries a particular weight. Here is the thing that, once you know it, you cannot quite unknow. There is one spacecraft in that list that can only be reached by a single antenna on the entire planet. Voyager 2. Voyager 2's path through the solar system took it far below the plane of the planets, down into the southern sky, deeper south than any other active spacecraft. And that geometry means it can only be seen from the southern hemisphere. Only one antenna on Earth has both the size and the southern view to send commands to Voyager 2. The 70-meter dish at the Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex, sitting in the Tidbinbilla Valley of Australia. Its designation is DSS-43. That dish, that single dish in that one valley in Australia, is the only voice on Earth that Voyager 2 can hear. The only one. Goldstone cannot reach it. Madrid cannot reach it. If DSS-43 were to go offline, there would be no other option. No backup antenna of sufficient size and southern position to take its place. The thread to Voyager 2 runs through one point, and one point only. Hold that thought for a moment. Let it settle. Now consider what happened in 2020. In 2020, DSS-43 was taken offline for upgrades, necessary upgrades, long planned, vital to the antenna's long-term health. The work took nearly a year, and during that year, NASA could not send a single command to Voyager 2, not one word. The spacecraft was given enough preloaded instructions to look after itself, to hold its course, monitor its systems, keep its transmitter pointed toward home, and then it simply waited. Millions and millions of kilometers away, in the cold and the dark, Voyager 2 floated and waited for its only friend on Earth to come back. Nearly a year of silence from Earth's side. But here is the thing. Here is the part that carries a particular kind of comfort, if you let it. Even while DSS-43 was dark and under scaffolding in a valley in Australia, the network never stopped listening. The silence was one-directional. Earth could not speak to Voyager 2, but Earth never stopped hearing it. Other antennas, wherever they had a view, kept their receivers tuned. Voyager 2's faint signal continued to arrive. That thin 20-watt whisper spread across billions of kilometers, and the network received it, tracked it, logged it every day. The thread was not broken. It was simply, for a time, one way. And then DSS-43 came back online, the upgrades were complete, and the first thing they did was send Voyager 2 a test command, hello, across 2 billion kilometers. And Voyager 2 answered, right on schedule, right where the math said it would be. The conversation resumed, just as if nothing had interrupted it, except time. Voyager 2 has been traveling since 1977. Its nuclear batteries, radioisotope thermoelectric generators, converting the slow decay of plutonium-238 into electricity, have been producing power this whole time, but they produce a little less each year as the plutonium decays. And so, gently and gradually, the spacecraft has been losing power. Over the years, engineers have responded by switching off instruments one by one. Heaters, then sensors, then cameras that finished their work decades ago. Each switch-off carefully chosen to keep the most important thing alive, the radio transmitter. The thin, faint 20-watt voice calling home. The same is true of Voyager 1. Both spacecraft are managed now as carefully as you might manage a very old, very fragile thing that you love. Every watt accounted for, every instrument weighed against the cost. The goal is simple: keep the signal going as long as possible. Keep the thread unbroken for as many years as the physics will allow. Engineers estimate both Voyagers may be able to maintain some communication into the 2030s, perhaps a little beyond. After that, the power will simply not be enough. The signal will fade below what even the most sensitive antennas on Earth can hear, and the vigil for those two particular travelers will end, but not yet. Tonight, somewhere, a dish is pointed at Voyager 1. Tonight, DSS-43 in Canberra is keeping its eye on Voyager 2, and the signals, slower than a trickle, are coming home. How slow is that trickle? It is worth sitting with the actual number, because the actual number is one of those facts that sounds impossible until you remember how enormous the distances have become. In Voyager's early years, the spacecraft could send data back at rates that, while modest by earthly standards, were at least usable, thousands of bits per second. But as the distance grew and the power budget shrank, that rate fell and fell. Today, Voyager communicates at only a few tens of bits per second, not kilobits, not megabits, bits. Each individual bit of information, each 0 or 1, takes a moment to send, and they arrive at Earth one by one, slowly, like drops from a nearly dry faucet. To put that in perspective, a single image on your phone, a small photograph, might contain several million bits. At the rates Voyager transmits, sending that photograph would take days, weeks possibly, depending on its size, and yet, with enough patience, the data comes home. The spacecraft's remaining science instruments, measuring magnetic fields, detecting particles in the interstellar medium, gather their readings and encode them into that slow trickle, and the trickle arrives and the network receives it, and scientists on Earth learn something true about a place no human instrument has ever been before. It just takes time, a lot of time. New Horizons, the probe that flew past Pluto in July of 2015, offers another version of this patience. New Horizons is faster than the Voyagers in some senses, a sleek modern spacecraft designed for the long journey. But it faces the same fundamental constraint, distance. And when it finally swept past Pluto, when its cameras and instruments drank in that ancient russet-colored world and its moons, it gathered an enormous amount of data, gigabits of images and measurements, the closest views human eyes had ever had of Pluto. Getting that data home took 15 months after the flyby of the Deep Space Network patiently receiving the downlink. Each antenna pass adding a little more to the archive, each day's work bringing home a few more images, a few more readings. The pictures of Pluto's mountains, its heart-shaped plain, its hazes, all of that arrived slowly, in pieces, over more than a year, carried on a radio signal traveling at the speed of light across billions of kilometers, arriving at a dish in a desert or a valley, and then making its way through a network of cables and computers to the scientists waiting for it. Patience, the dossier calls it. Measured in seasons, that is the right word. Now think about the people keeping this vigil. The three complexes are on 3 different continents, separated by thousands of kilometers. Goldstone is in California, in the Mojave Desert, where the days are bright and dry and the stars, on a clear night, are extraordinary. Madrid is in Spain, in the foothills west of the city, in the hills near Robledo de Chavela, where the countryside is quiet and the air is dry. Canberra is in Australia, in the Tidbinbilla Valley, where the hills are forested with eucalyptus and the nights carry the particular soft quality of the southern sky. And because they are on 3 different continents, they live in 3 very different time zones. When it is early afternoon at Goldstone, it is late evening in Madrid, and it is already tomorrow morning. in Canberra. When it is the middle of the night in California, operators in Madrid are finishing their morning coffee, and the Canberra team is watching the sun go down, the Earth turns, and the shifts change, and someone is always at a console. Always. There is no moment in a normal day when all three sites are asleep, because no arrangement of the world's time zones allows it. The planet itself, in its turning, ensures that somewhere one site is awake and alert. This is not an accident, it is the design. The 120-degree spacing that ensures no spacecraft is ever lost below the horizon also ensures that the human rhythm of watchfulness never stops. The engineering of the geometry serves both purposes at once, keeping the antennas covered and keeping the people covered. When a spacecraft is about to set below the horizon at Madrid, the controllers there begin preparing the handoff. They have been coordinating with their counterparts at Goldstone or Canberra, confirming that the other site has a good view, confirming that the receiving antenna is ready, confirming the timing, and then at the appointed moment the handoff happens. Madrid releases, Goldstone or Canberra acquires. Operators sometimes describe this process with a quiet tenderness, like passing a sleeping child between two sets of arms without waking it. The signal continues unbroken. The spacecraft, tens of millions of kilometers away, is unaware that anything changed. It simply keeps transmitting, keeps calling home, and somewhere on Earth, the ear shifts. But the listening never stops, acquiring lock. The moment the receiver at the new site catches the spacecraft signal and holds it, there is something almost ceremonial about it. The moment of contact, the moment the thread is confirmed intact. The signal is present. The spacecraft is where it is supposed to be, everything is well. And the pass continues. These handoffs happen dozens of times in a day, across the whole network, each one a small, unremarked act of continuity, each one ensuring that the conversation, begun in 1958 and never once interrupted for long, stays alive. And through all of it, through every pass and every handoff and every long overnight shift, there is a deeper layer of invisible work that makes everything else possible. It is the work of time. Not the time the operators spend, though that matters enormously. The time in a more precise sense, the exact measured, shared, agreed-upon tick of clocks that every measurement the network makes depends upon. Everything the Deep Space Network does in terms of navigation and ranging and Doppler measurement requires knowing time to an extraordinary degree of precision. Not the hour, not the minute, not even the second, fractions of a second, billionths of a second, because the entire technique of ranging, bouncing a coded signal off a spacecraft and timing how long it takes to come back, depends on knowing exactly when you sent it and exactly when you received it. If your clock is off by a microsecond, your distance measurement is off by hundreds of meters. If your clock drifts over the course of a long pass, your tracking accumulates errors, and so each of the three complexes maintains its own extremely precise clock. Not a quartz crystal, not the chip in your phone, a hydrogen maser atomic clock. A hydrogen maser works by exploiting the natural resonant frequency of hydrogen atoms, a frequency so stable, so consistent, so deeply written into the physics of matter that it barely varies. These clocks can maintain accuracy to within billionths of a second per day. They do not drift meaningfully over the course of a tracking session. They do not speed up when it gets warm or slow down when it gets cold. They simply tick steadily at a rate set by the atoms themselves. Each complex has one: Goldstone, Madrid, Canberra. And the Spaceflight Operations Facility at JPL in Pasadena keeps its own, and all of them are kept in careful agreement so that the entire network, spread across 3 continents and thousands of kilometers, shares a single, unified understanding of what time it is right now to the billionth of a second. The Deep Space Network is, among other things, a vast exercise in shared timekeeping. And all of that precision, all of that atomic clock stability serves in the end a very simple purpose: to let a dish aim at empty sky and wait for a whisper. This is one of the more quietly remarkable things about how the network operates. A spacecraft's position can be calculated far in advance from its known trajectory. The physics of orbital mechanics combined with years of tracking data gives mission controllers an extremely accurate picture of where a probe is going to be at any given moment in the future. Not approximately, very precisely. And so before a pass begins, before the spacecraft is even above the horizon at the tracking site, the dish begins to move. It turns slowly to where the spacecraft will rise. It points at a patch of empty sky because the spacecraft is not there yet. And it waits. The engineers trust the math. They trust the years of measurements and the atomic clocks and the models. They aim the dish at the right piece of empty darkness and they wait. And then the spacecraft rises right where the calculations said it would be, and the signal arrives and the receiver acquires lock. That image, a giant dish weighing thousands of tons, floating on its film of oil, turning in the dark to point at a spot of empty sky, trusting that something small and distant and fragile will appear exactly there, is one of the most quietly beautiful things about the whole enterprise. It is an act of faith in physics. And it works every single time. Think about that for a moment. Every single time. Voyager 1 has been traveling for nearly 50 years. It has covered more than 22 light hours of distance. Its position is known well enough that a dish can be pointed at the right bit of sky, cold, before the signal arrives. And the signal arrives exactly where expected. The mathematics of space travel and the same mathematics that sent it out there in the first place is reliable enough to thread a needle across the solar system from a valley in the Mojave Desert, or a fold in the hills near Madrid, or a quiet corner of the southern sky near Canberra. That is a kind of human achievement that does not get talked about enough. Not the rockets, not the launches, but this. The sustained, patient, collaborative work of listening. Of keeping the thread, of trusting the math year after year across distances that are very difficult to even picture, and continuing to be right. The network's roots go back to 1950, the very birth of NASA, which itself makes the DSN one of the oldest continuously operating pieces of the space program. Think about what was happening in 1958. The first artificial satellite, Sputnik, had gone up only the year before. The space age was barely breathing, and yet the seeds of this network, these widely spaced ground stations, this architecture of continuous coverage, were being planted. The conversation began almost before anyone knew what it would become. And it has never stopped. Not through the Mercury missions, the Gemini missions, not through Apollo. In 1969, antennas in this network and nearby Australian stations relayed the live television of the Apollo 11 moonwalk to the world. The footage of those first steps on another world passing through equipment in Canberra and at nearby facilities, reaching living rooms everywhere. The network was the conduit for one of the most watched moments in human history. Not through the Viking landers on Mars, not through the Voyager flybys of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, all of that imagery, all of those images of ring systems and storm clouds and moons nobody had ever seen up close. All of it came home through the network's dishes. The original 64-meter dish at Goldstone was actually enlarged to 70 meters specifically to keep hearing Voyager as the spacecraft moved away and its signal grew fainter. The network grew its ears to stay in contact with its most famous traveler. Not through Cassini at Saturn, not through Curiosity on Mars, not through New Horizons at Pluto, not through the ongoing family of Mars orbiters and landers and rovers, each one needing its window on the daily schedule, each one sending home its pictures and measurements through one of the great dishes turning in their valleys. The combined three-site architecture means there is no single moment on any ordinary day when humanity is not in contact with at least some of its most distant machines. The conversation, begun in 1958, has essentially never stopped. A few brief interruptions like DSS-43's year of maintenance, moments of solar conjunction when the sun's noise swamps the signal and everyone waits for the geometry to shift. But these are pauses, not endings. The vigil resumes. And tonight, wherever you are, the vigil continues. Right now, in the Tidbinbilla Valley of Australia, it is some hour of the night or day, depending on when you are listening, and a console operator is watching a screen. The dish outside is moving slowly, tracking something. The signal is there, present, faint, holding. In Robledo de Chavela, west of Madrid, another operator at another screen watches another signal from another spacecraft. In the Mojave Desert at Goldstone, the same. And in Pasadena, at the Spaceflight Operations Facility, a room that has been in continuous operation for decades and is a National Historic Landmark, the streams of data from all three sites flow in and are managed and logged. The DSN Now dashboard is updating right now if you wanted to look. Lines reaching out from those 3 points on the globe towards small labeled icons representing the machines humanity has sent out into the dark. Each line a real signal, a real thread, a real conversation happening at this very moment. Voyager 1 somewhere beyond the heliopause in the interstellar medium, sending home its few tens of bits per second. A signal 22 hours old by the time it arrives, carrying news of a place no instrument has ever sampled before. The network is listening. Voyager 2 also in interstellar space, also fading, sending home what it can. And DSS-43 in Canberra, the one dish, the only dish, is listening, because it is the only one that can. New Horizons, still travelling outward past Pluto, still occasionally sending home the last of its observations, the final pieces of the scientific record from that extraordinary flyby in 2015. The network is listening. The Mars orbiters and rovers, closer, busier, sending more data at faster rates, filling in the logbook of another world day by day. The network is listening. The sun-watching spacecraft, the asteroid explorers, the missions to Jupiter, the network is listening to all of them, passing them between its three great ears, following the turning of the Earth, trusting the math, keeping the thread. It started in 1958, it has been going ever since. And somewhere, always, someone is awake and watching the signal hold. Now let that settle for a moment. Let the scale of it drift through you, softly, the way it deserves to. The Deep Space Network is not just infrastructure, it is not just antennas and cables and computers, though it is all of those things. It is, if you look at it from a certain angle, as being a certain gentle, slightly sleepy angle, a form of sustained attention, a collective decision made every day for 66 years and counting to keep listening, to keep the thread alive, to trust that the faint signal arriving from somewhere impossibly far is worth receiving, worth decoding, worth caring about. There is something deeply reassuring in that if you let yourself feel it. Think of all the things that stop, all the projects that are launched with great intention and quietly abandoned, all the conversations that begin in enthusiasm and trail off, all the vigils that are kept for a week, a month, and then gradually, understandably, released. Well, this one has not been released, this one is still going. A signal weaker than a snowflake's impact, arriving at a dish in a valley, pulled out of the noise by a receiver cooled to within a few degrees of absolute zero, shaped and amplified and decoded and sent to a screen where someone, right now, is watching it hold. All of the care and the engineering and the patience and the atomic clocks and the hydrostatic oil bearings and the cryogenic amplifiers and the precisely calculated pointing, all of it in service of the simple act of keeping a thread alive across a distance that takes light more than a day to cross. And before that thread grows too thin to hold, Before the nuclear batteries finally cool to the point where the signal can no longer make it home, the network will have heard from Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 for half a century. 50 years of a conversation that began when the world was a different place, when no human instrument had ever left the solar system, when nobody knew what the interstellar medium actually felt like from the inside. Now we know a little because the signal kept coming home and the network kept listening. That seems worth staying awake for, but only just. Because here, now, in the dark of wherever you are, it is enough to know that the vigil is in good hands. The operators are at their consoles, the dishes are moving, tracing arcs across the sky. The atomic clocks are ticking, steady, patient, accurate, to the billionth of a second. The signals are arriving, faint and faithful, each one a message sent long ago from somewhere very far away, each one received and logged and cared for. You don't need to watch. You can rest. Think of the Tidbinbilla Valley in the dark, the eucalyptus quiet, the dish above the control room turning slowly, pointed south at something no other antenna can reach. Think of Goldstone, the Mojave immense and still around it, the stars very clear at that altitude, and the dishes white against them, massive and unhurried, following something patient and distant. Think of Robledo de Chavela, the hills folded around the valley, the Madrid light glow faint on the horizon, and the dish there attending to its own piece of the sky. 3 valleys, 3 watch points, 1 continuous thread. And in Pasadena, at the Spaceflight Operations Facility, the screens are on. They were on yesterday. They will be on tomorrow. The room that has never stopped operating, that has been on duty since the beginning of the space age, is on duty tonight. Wherever Voyager is, 22 light hours out in a darkness humans have never directly visited, carrying instruments measuring things that have never been measured from that vantage before. The network knows, roughly, where it is. The math says where it will be. The dish aims at the empty sky. The signal arrives right on schedule, like a letter from someone you trust who is very far away. And the network receives it every day, every night. Earlier tonight you wondered what it might feel like to be the person watching that signal, sitting in the dark of a desert control room or a hillside building, watching a single, faint line on a screen, knowing that line represents a machine billions of kilometers away. Knowing that the light carrying its news left it yesterday or the day before. Knowing that your reply, when you send one, will not arrive for another day or more. There is a patience to that work that is hard to describe from outside it, a willingness to operate in a time scale that most daily life does not ask of us. We are used to responses in seconds, in milliseconds, in the nearly instantaneous back and forth of a conversation that feels like presence. The DSN operates in a different mode entirely. You send, you wait. The answer arrives, eventually, from very far away, and it is the right answer, and that is enough. And the people who do that work have been doing it in an unbroken chain since 1958, passing the consoles from one generation to the next, training new operators in the same careful practices, the same attention to the signal, the same quiet readiness. The knowledge of how to do this, how to aim a dish at empty sky and trust the math, how to pull a whisper out of cosmic noise, how to hand a spacecraft from one valley to the next without dropping it. That knowledge has been accumulated and preserved and transmitted across 66 years. That is its own kind of vigil. You are made of a world where this is happening. Right now, as you lie in the dark, as your breathing slows and the edges of your thoughts go soft, the network is awake. The dishes are moving. The signals are arriving. The clocks are ticking. The thread to Voyager, to New Horizons, to the dozens of probes scattered across the solar system is intact. You were wondering at the start of this how we stay in touch with spacecraft so far away. How is it possible at all to maintain a conversation across distances that take light hours or days to cross? How is it possible that a 20-watt signal, less than a refrigerator bulb, can be heard at all after traveling billions of kilometers? The answer is with extraordinary care, with 3 valleys and 3 sets of enormous ears, with oil bearings and cryogenic amplifiers and atomic clocks and decades of accumulated patience, with a schedule negotiated every day and a handoff choreographed like passing something precious from one pair of hands to another, with the willingness to aim a dish at empty sky and trust that the mathematics will deliver what it promised, with people working in shifts around the planet so that no spacecraft is ever alone for long. The network has been doing this since 1958. It will keep doing it. Tonight, right now, it is doing it. The conversation that began before most of the probes it monitors were even designed is still ongoing, and the voices in it, human voices encoded as radio, spacecraft replies encoded as telemetry, all of it riding on light, are still finding each other across the dark. That is the deep space network, not just antennas, not just engineering, a sustained act of listening written across 3 continents, maintained across 6 decades, aimed at the farthest things humanity has ever touched, and it has the night covered. So wherever you are tonight, in a warm bed, on a couch, in a room, with a lamp still on somewhere, you don't need to keep watch. The vigil is not yours to hold tonight. Someone else has it. 3 sets of valleys, 3 teams of consoles, 3 great dishes floating on their films of oil, turning slowly and steadily under the stars. They are listening for you in a way, listening on behalf of all of us to the machines we sent out there to know more about the dark. And the dark, quietly, is answering. If you're still awake, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Leave it in the comments. It's one of my favorite things to read. And if these slow journeys help you drift off, a like and a subscribe means more than I can say. Small creators like me really do rely on your support to keep these nights going, but for now, rest. The Night Watch has the dark covered. You can let go now.